Like most things in life, you have choices. Sometimes the decisions you make have little to no repercussions. But when you're in charge of an aircraft, even though they may seem insignificant at the time, the choices you make can have serious consequences. This time on Shortfield, I visit a wonderful grass strip I've never been to before, set in the owner's back garden, where I not only struggle with low cloud...
So we're getting some warnings of high ground here.
I have issues trying to establish my landing direction.
The wind is really sort of so much different up in the air than it is on the deck.
Then really misjudge the effect soft ground has on my takeoff roll, leaving things much tighter than they ever should have been. And to top it all off, I suffer time pressures to get back home with fog developing and the sun setting. Did I make the right choices? Well, join me on this interesting little flight and come and see for yourself. It was a high pressure winter's morning as I drove to the airfield. The weather was eventually forecast to become clear blue skies with a southerly wind. However, on the drive in, I wasn't holding out much hope. The high pressure and moist still air had generated low cloud overnight, which had covered much of the southeast of England, and it didn't look like it was going to shift any time soon. I had planned to fly up to the East Midlands to a small grass strip called Wolf Farm, with two short runways, the longest of which was orientated 0220 at 430 metres or 1,400 feet long, and a short cross runway orientated 1129 at a listed length of just 340 metres or 1,100 feet. The airfield sits at 295 feet above mean sea level, but has rising ground all around, plus a sloping golf course on the approach to 20 and tall trees at the threshold of 02. 29 has a public footpath running right across the threshold. Arriving at my base airfield of North Weald, around 10 miles to the northeast of London, I pre-flight the aircraft and give it a little clean, then wait patiently for the weather to break. I had planned to depart at 10:30, but after nearly 2 hours the cloud base was still only at 800 feet. But it was thinning and breaking up, and there were now some pretty big holes in it. So I jump in, grab some fuel and taxi out for takeoff. Finally, I line up at just after 1300 or 1 PM, leaving me only 3.5 hours to fly the 115 nautical miles up to Wolf Farm and get back again before Northfield closed at 16:40.
Golf Charlie Zulu rolling 20. Roger.
Departing runway 20 at Northfield with a moderate southeasterly wind, I climb away with that low winter sun shining through the holes in the cloud.
Speed's alive.
130, bye-bye.
Positive rate of climb.
As I turn west after departure, annoyingly, even though the cloud has some nice big holes in it,
Oh look, if only I could go a bit higher, I'd just nip through that gap there.
I can't climb through them, as there's controlled airspace just a few hundred feet above me.
So there we go, so really important we keep an eye on ground obstacles, because we are flying fairly low here. So we're going to set a minimum for ourselves of 600 feet, otherwise we're going to have to turn back. So we're getting some warnings of high ground here. Keeping as slow as we can.
This is getting a bit dangerous, at only 500 to 600 feet above the surface and with things looking really murky ahead, and with the terrain warnings going off, I hatch a plan and switch my radio over to Essex Radar, who are the controllers for this zone.
Golf Charlie Zulu is clear to the west, going to go to Essex now, 120625.
120625, bye-bye.
Bye.
Pull up.
Essex Radar, Golf November Juliet, Charlie Zulu.
Terrain, pull up.
That station check in, sorry, I think I missed that call sign. Was it Golf Lima Juliet Charlie Zulu?
Negative, it's Golf November Juliet Charlie Zulu. We're cruising out of Northfield on my way up towards Leicester. Currently I'm VFR just in the TMZ at 900 feet, 1027, and I was wondering if there's plenty of breaks in the cloud and I'd like to climb above because I'm having to stay quite low. Is there any chance I could just nip up into the TMZ or just up into the controlled airspace just for a little bit en route?
Golf Charlie Zulu, yeah, not a problem. Squawk 7402, you're cleared to transit. VFR not above altitude 2,000 feet.
7402 and not above 2,000 feet. Golf Charlie Zulu.
So that was not my best RT with the Essex radar controller, but I think I got across what I needed to.
So that's good, so we're going to find a gap here.
Golf Charlie Zulu, you are identified as a basic service currently. The QNH is 1027.
1027, basic service, and I'll just commence my climb now. Thank you.
Well, he understood what I wanted to do, and with a large hole ahead of me, I commenced to climb up into the controlled airspace above me.
Papa climbing to 4,000 feet on the Nugget 1 Romeo. Right, 1 Whiskey Papa, Stansted, climb now, flight level 70. 70, right now, 1 Whiskey Papa.
Much better, it's too dangerous down there, low down.
I'm below 3,000 feet, so to remain under VFR rules, I must remain in visual contact with the ground.
Still good view of the ground, and much safer up here. Perfect.
However, as long as I am clear of the cloud and can see the surface, it doesn't matter that I'm above the cloud. I did a little video on the VFR rules, and I'll pop a link above if you want to check that out.
Golf Charlie Zulu, you've just entered controlled airspace there at 1,500 feet. It is radar control, but you will leave the controlled airspace again in about 1.5 miles. I'll be back to a basic service outside.
Thank you, yeah, good VMC now, so I'll stop my climb at 1,800 feet, 1027, and I'll be basic outside. Golf Charlie Zulu.
Golf Charlie Zulu, just for onward planning, the track you're currently on, is that the one you'll be keeping on the way up to Leicester?
Negative, going to route via Laurel.
Roger that.
Laurel is an IFR waypoint right on the boundary of where the low-level CTA meets the higher TMA airspace. Whenever I fly cross-country VFR, I always try and plan my routing via IFR waypoints or established nav aids. There's two reasons for this. Firstly, it's easier to find them in the aircraft's GPS with their 5-letter designators as opposed to the VFR reporting points, which can be called pretty much anything. Secondly, if I need to talk to a radar service whilst en route, they will be familiar with all of these waypoints, and being a defined set of coordinates, they are much more accurate than a VFR one, which relies on a visual location. I found when using IFR waypoints, I often get clearances through controlled airspace where I wouldn't otherwise, even though I'm flying under VFR rules. My choice to climb above the broken cloud was based on a few factors. The first being that staying low was getting too dangerous and I was getting very close to busting my minimum descent height. Secondly, from the forecasts and from checked airfields ATIS along the route, I knew the weather was going to be clear in just 10 to 20 miles or so north from here. I could also see these big holes with blue sky above, and the very thin cloud would mean I would have plenty of space to climb through and still remain VFR. My third reason was that by getting a controlled airspace entry, I would be under traffic service, which would give me better protection during the climb and then once above. Would you have made the same choice? Carried on below, or would you have returned to North Weald? With good clear visibility above and with the cloud now petering out, I set the autopilot to follow my GPS routing all the way to Wolf Farm and eventually climb up to 5,000 feet. Farm and grass strips by their very nature have a serious lack of facilities, and even with proper pre-planning and a full brief you can still get confused when you arrive overhead. And all your planning means nothing if you can't orientate yourself correctly with regard to the topography and the weather conditions. As I arrive overhead, even though my flight app depicts the airfield and the chart clearly shows where the windsock is located, I just can't see it.
Okay, I can't really establish the wind at the moment, so...
Using the southerly wind at altitude as my reference, I set up for a low approach and go around to runway 20. The longer of the two runways.
Wolf on traffic, Golf November Juliet Charlie Zulu, full cruiser in the overhead, descending dead side for runway 20 Wolf Farm.
I descend on the dead side and then I roll out onto crosswind leg.
This is really hard to find.
Downwind now, but I'm struggling to keep the airfield in my view as it appears lost in the ground cutter. This is where the GPS comes into its own. I turn base, finish off all my checks, positively identify the correct runway, then turn onto final at less than a mile.
Fuel pumps on, brakes are off, undercarriage is down, fixed mixture. We've got fuel pumps on, fuel sufficient for go around, we're hatched, we're harnessed.
I remain high, checking out any obstacles on the approach path and get a good feel for the wind.
To feel what the wind's doing, that looks a really nice runway. There is some big trees there.
Maynard Farm traffic, Zulu Foxtrot in the overhead, 1,000 feet, going to be Johnny Townwood, right hand here at Maynard Farm traffic.
As I fly over, I get to check out the complete airfield and I start to question whether I'm making the right choice and landing on the correct runway for the wind conditions, which really do feel more easterly than southerly.
The other runway actually looked better, didn't it? So let's have a look at the other one.
So even though I hadn't prepared mentally to land on the shorter strip, I decided to give it a go. And I turned right onto a downwind leg for the 340 metre or 1,100 foot runway 11.
Yeah, that wind's from the right here, isn't it?
As I turn onto final, I can feel the wind from the right, which confirms it's actually a southerly wind. But I've now chosen approach to a short easterly runway. So I'll power up for yet another go around.
Yeah, that's better, isn't it?
I've made a mistake, runway 20 was the correct choice, yet stupidly I started to set up for a landing on 11 next time around.
So let's change that to cancel current approach, then we'll do a make an approach, and this is runway 11.
As I climb away, I see another little local airfield within the pattern for Wolf Farm's runway 11, and I can see it has a windsock sounding out nicely.
Oh, there's a windsock down there. What one's that one? That's O'Baston Lodge. Oh, that looks a much nicer runway.
It is only then that the penny drops and I need to be landing on 20, not 11.
Let's just go away a second. Let's do, I think 20 is the best one.
So I turn left onto a long final for 20.
Right, nothing on the approach, runway's clear.
You can see by the correction I'm putting in that the wind is actually more of a southeasterly at height, and it feels quite strong. There's a golf course to fly over on short final, but luckily it looks as if no one's playing today, but I wouldn't fancy this approach on a busy golfing day. I hadn't noticed on my first pass how hilly it was, and as we approach the threshold I start to get closer to those little hills than I'm comfortable with. I touch down around 100 metres or 300 feet into the runway, but the grass is damp and I try not to use too much braking,
That feels very short.
letting the aircraft slow down by itself, which it does remarkably quickly. I parked the aircraft next to the house where I was requested to by the owner when I'd obtained PPR. I jump out and have a look around. So there you go. This is Wolf Farm up in Leicestershire. This is the guy's house. It's like crazy. Look at that windsock, shows why it was so difficult to see from the air. Orange against the full colours, but it is confirming a southeasterly wind. This is a lovely place. There's a bungalow, which I assume is the owner's house there. Let's have a walk and go and find the movements book. I suppose you have to fill in the movements book down here, I suppose. I don't know. He never gave me any instructions. There's a hangar over here. Let's go and have a look. Show him the aircraft as we drink our tea. Yeah, we've had it for a few... sorry, I cast your nose wheel. I dug in your grass a bit. Yeah. And I apologise for the aircraft digging into his grass where I turned around. This didn't register at the time, but will come to haunt me later on. The windsock is now showing the wind has dropped to less than 5 knots, and I decided to choose runway 29, the 1100 foot or 340 metre one in front of us, with the clear departure end to take off from. Finishing my tea, I noticed that the sun has started to get very low in the sky, and after checking the time, I realise I have just over 90 minutes to get back to North Weald before the airfield closes. I say my goodbyes, check the aircraft, start up, and then taxi down runway 11. I power up on the brakes, then release, lining up as I turn. As the prop starts to bite into the air, the aircraft feels quite sluggish. The airspeed slowly starts to rise. Finally, I just about get to a speed where I can lift off and rise into ground effect. That's better, I can feel the difference in the acceleration now. At last I can establish a shallow climb as we shoot past the end of the runway and over the railway cutting. As I climb away, it's all starting to make sense now. The reason I stopped so quickly on the landing, with little braking, was because the ground was soft, which is the same reason the wheels dug into the grass when I parked up, and it's also the same reason my ground rub was so sluggish on the takeoff run. I had totally missed the fact that with all the recent rain, the ground was now pretty soft. It hadn't felt that way walking on it, but our little tyres had dug in a bit, adding a lot of drag. So my choice to use the shorter runway was probably a wrong one. I had departed at 15:12 GMT. Sunset was at 16:10, and our airfield closes 30 minutes after that, which left me a good hour and a half to fly the 110 nautical miles back home. However, initially as I climb up to 3,000 feet, I get a full-on headwind at 40 knots, so decide to descend to 1,600 feet, where I'll still have good terrain clearance, but the wind, although still right on the nose, was a little bit weaker at 30 knots, giving me an estimated time of arrival at North Weald of 16:15. Now that's a bit better. As I head southeast in the cruise, with a pitiful ground speed of just 80 knots, I watch the sun getting lower in the sky to my west, and despite the strong wind, the air is smooth, the autopilot's engaged and flying in altitude, hold and heading mode. And apart from the occasional heading adjustments, I just sit back and enjoy the view. I now have only 30 miles to go. The forecast for the afternoon and early evening was for clear skies in the southeast, but as I pass a beam London Stansted Airport just 12 miles to my east, I see there's lots of low cloud over it, and hear them on the radio to other aircraft reporting a 400 foot cloud base and 3,000 metre visibility. Ahead of me I can see the low cloud from earlier in the day hasn't properly cleared, and there's a marked low level inversion with some very light cloud topping it. The low level visibility is definitely getting poorer, and once that sun sets in a few minutes, not only will I have the low light to contend with, but the dew point will get very close to the ground temperature, and this could easily develop into fog. As I descend into the inversion, the visibility drops down for a few seconds, but then settles at around 5 kilometers. I join the downwind at North Weald and it's still not great, but as I turn onto base and then final, it all just seems to clear. This flight was quite eventful, and I wonder, would you have made the same choices as I did? Perhaps I should have turned around instead of climbing above the cloud on the way out. When I got to Wolf Farm, I couldn't work out which runway to land on. Should I have gone somewhere else? Was the choice to depart from a short soft runway with a potential tailwind wise, or should I have taken the longer one? And what about coming back? Was the choice to chat away with the owner, leaving myself tight on time to get back, a good one? Especially with the weather being unknown at my home airfield. Flying light aircraft as a single pilot means the choices and decisions you make are solely your own, and each will have a consequence. My choices on this flight could so easily have gone the wrong way, but they didn't, so at least I have the opportunity to add them to that big bag we call experience. On this flight, I was flying under VFR rules. Are you aware of the cloud and visibility distances you need when flying VFR? Why not check out my video on flying VFR to the max next. Thank you so much for watching. I'm not an instructor and this is all based on my experience as a private pilot here in the UK. Fly safe and apologies for the croaky voiceover. I had a bit of a cold whilst I was producing this. Short field out.